So guys, I've decided how I'm going to renovate the kitchen, Rachel said with that annoying confidence that always preceded her biggest blunders. I'm going to knock down this wall here and put in a modern central island. It's going to be amazing. She gestured excitedly in my parents' dining room, pointing to the kitchen wall as if she already owned the place. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. My dad smiled proudly, my mom clapped quietly, and my stomach churned for reasons that had nothing to do with the roast turkey. Because there was one small detail Rachel didn't know. The house hadn't been in my parents' name for 6 months. My name is Philip, I'm 34 years old, and I'm a civil engineer. I've been working in construction for over a decade, so when my father casually mentioned that he was having trouble paying for necessary repairs to the family home, I offered a solution that seemed to benefit everyone at the time. I bought his house. It wasn't charity. It was a smart investment at market value, on the condition that they could continue to live there for as long as they wanted. They were relieved to have their financial problems solved. I got a good real estate deal, and everyone came out ahead. Everyone except Rachel, who apparently didn't get that important memo. And then I'm going to renovate my old bedroom, she continued, now drawing imaginary blueprints in the air. I'm going to turn it into a home office. Remote work is on the rise, right? It'll be perfect for when I move back. Move back. The words echoed in my head as I watched my parents exchange nervous glances. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother make that discreet hand gesture she always did when she wanted to change the subject quickly. Rachel, honey, how about we talk about this later? Mom suggested tensely. Why later? It's his family home. Philip doesn't mind, does he, brother? Rachel turned to me with that manipulative smile he'd known since childhood. You've always been the good one in the family. Good. The word that defined 3 decades of his life. The responsible son who never caused any trouble, who always helped when needed, who never asked for anything in return. While Rachel accumulated debt, lost jobs, and failed relationships, he quietly built his career. And now it was her planning to renovate his house. Actually, I began, placing my fork carefully on my plate, we need to talk about a few things. The tone of my voice must have alerted them to something, because the lively conversation ceased instantly. Rachel frowned, my father cleared his throat uncomfortably, and my mother began smoothing her napkin on her lap with nervous movements. What kind of talk? Rachel asked, her confidence beginning to waver. I got up from the table and walked over to my briefcase, which I had strategically left near the front door. Throughout dinner, I had watched my younger sister make grand plans for a property she automatically assumed would be her anticipated inheritance. I returned to the table carrying a manila folder containing documents that would completely change the family dynamic. Rachel stared at the folder as if it were a bomb about to explode. And maybe it was. These are the documents for the purchase and sale of the house, I explained calmly, removing the papers from the folder. Signed 6 months ago. The property is now officially in his name. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the ticking of the clock in the room. Rachel looked at the documents, then at our parents, as if she expected someone to shout gotcha. No one shouted. This is impossible, she whispered finally. You couldn't have sold the family home without telling me. Dad cleared his throat. Rachel, we tried to talk to you about the financial situation several times, but you always changed the subject or were too busy with his own problems, I added mentally, but kept my mouth shut. My sister always had a knack for showing up only when she needed something. Money, a place to stay after yet another failed relationship, or help getting out of financial trouble. Conversations about family responsibilities? She always found a way to avoid those. If you're enjoying this family twist, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this explosive situation unfolded. Because what Rachel didn't know yet was that I had documented every request for money, every broken promise, and every time our parents mortgaged his future to solve her problems. And now, seeing her plan renovations on a house that legally belonged to me, I realized it was time for some inconvenient truths to come out. You can't have done this to me. Rachel screamed, her voice rising 3 octaves as she jumped up from her chair. Grandma's china rattled on the table with the impact. This house is rightfully mine. I grew up here, I have memories here. I watched my sister transform into the person I had known for years, manipulative, dramatic, and completely incapable of accepting that the world did not revolve around her. She was the same person who, at 28, still expected others to solve her problems while she collected excuses for every failure. Rachel, Dad tried to intervene, his voice tired from having had this discussion countless times before. We've tried to explain the financial situation, but you always. Always what? Always too busy to listen to him. Guys plan to steal my inheritance. She pointed an accusing finger at me. And you, Philip, what kind of brother does that? Takes advantage of your parents' situation to steal the family home. Steal. The word echoed in the room like a slap. For the past 6 months, while I paid all the household bills, necessary repairs, and even helped with the monthly groceries, Rachel only showed up here for Sunday dinners and to ask to borrow money. I didn't steal anything, I replied calmly, organizing the documents back into the folder. I bought the house at market value when you were about to lose it to his bank. The truth was more complicated than that, but Rachel was never interested in financial details. While our parents faced increasing difficulties over the past 2 years, insufficient retirement funds, expensive medication for Mom, urgent home repairs, Rachel continued to show up only to ask for more money. $2,000 for a car emergency in January. $1,500 for an apartment deposit in March, which never happened. $800 for a vocational course in May, which she dropped out of in the second week. Philip has been helping us financially for years, Mom said quietly, looking down at her hands. When he needed money for the car, who do you think lent it to him? When her account was overdrawn 3 times this year, who covered it? Rachel turned to me with flaming eyes. You're turning them against me. This is financial blackmail. Financial blackmail. Coming from the person who called crying every time she needed money, promising to pay it back as soon as she got her act together. Promises that had accumulated into an unofficial debt of over $12,000 over the past 3 years. Show her, I said to Dad, gesturing toward the drawer of the old dresser. The notebook. Dad's face paled. He knew exactly what I was asking for. Mom closed her eyes as if she wanted to be anywhere but there. Rachel looked between us, confused, but with a defensive expression growing. He, Dad, slowly got up and walked to the dresser. He took out a blue spiral notebook, the kind used in school, with pages yellowed by time. He returned to the table and placed it in front of Rachel. "What's this?" she asked, but her voice had lost some of her indignation. "Open it," he instructed. Rachel hesitated before opening the cover. The first page showed his careful handwriting, "Loans Rachel," followed by a date from 3 years ago. Each subsequent page listed amounts, dates, and reasons. A meticulous accounting of every penny she had borrowed and never repaid. Her skin turned pale as she flipped through the pages. Dozens of entries. Hundreds of small loans that added up to a frightening amount. "Were you spying on me?" she whispered. "He was documenting," I corrected. "Because every time you promise to pay it back, something happens. A new emergency, a new problem, a new excuse." Rachel slammed the notebook shut. Those were temporary situations. He was going through hard times. 3 years ago? I asked. Because temporary hard times seemed to be his permanent state. Tears began to form in her eyes, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. Until I remembered all the times those same tears had been used to manipulate our parents. Tears that always came at the exact moment she needed money or wanted to avoid a conversation about responsibility. "You don't understand how hard it is out there," she sobbed. "I'm trying to build my career, find my passion. Some of us aren't lucky enough to be born knowing exactly what we want to do." The self-pity card. Rachel was 28 and had already tried being a photographer, graphic designer, personal trainer, event planner, social media consultant, and holistic therapist. Each new passion lasted between 2 and 6 months before something unexpected happened. "Philip has been working since he was 16, Mom said softly. He paid for his own college, built his career. He never asked." Of course he never asked. Rachel exploded. "He's the perfect son. The successful engineer with his own house and stable career. It's easy to be perfect when you don't have depression, anxiety, and artistic sensitivity." Artistic sensibility. The new term she had adopted to justify why she couldn't hold down jobs. The depression and anxiety were real, I didn't doubt that, but she used them as a shield against any responsibility or criticism. "No one is saying you have to be perfect," I said, keeping my voice calm. We're saying you have to be responsible. Responsible? She laughed bitterly. Like he, who steals from the family home behind their backs. I saved the family home, I corrected her. You were 3 months behind on the mortgage when I offered to help. The bank had already sent a foreclosure notice. Rachel looked at our parents, seeking denial, but found only awkward silence. The financial reality she had ignored for so long finally caught up with her. That's not fair, she whispered. I always knew this house would be mine one day. You always implied. We never promised that, Dad said firmly. You assumed it. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the kettle whistling in the kitchen. Mom got up to turn it off, clearly grateful for the excuse to leave the room. Rachel looked at me with a mixture of anger and despair. What now? Are you going to kick me out? Send her, your own sister, away. You don't live here, I reminded her. You have your own apartment. That I can barely afford, she shouted. That's why I needed to move in here. And there it was. The truth finally laid bare. It wasn't about memories or family rights. It was about money, as always. Rachel needed a free place to live because once again, her finances were collapsing. I looked at my sister, her hair a mess, her makeup smudged from crying, wearing expensive clothes she couldn't afford, and felt a mixture of pity and frustration that had been with me for years. But this time, I was in control. And Rachel was about to find out that some bridges, when burned repeatedly, eventually. The first call came on Monday morning while I was reviewing projects at the office. Philip, we need to talk, Aunt Margaret's voice echoed through the phone with that tone of disapproval she reserved for family emergencies. Rachel called me last night, crying. She said he stole the family home and now she's going to be homeless. Homeless. The words echoed in my head as I watched the rain stream down the window of my office on the 23rd floor. Rachel had a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, a relatively new car financed by our parents, and credit cards that Dad paid religiously. Aunt Margaret, that's not how it is. It's not, she interrupted him. Philip, this girl is desperate. She said you took advantage of his parents' vulnerability to take his house. What kind of son does that? I hung up after 20 minutes of lecturing, only for the phone to ring again. This time it was Cousin Robert, then Cousin Jennifer, then Uncle William. All with the same story. Rachel was being wronged by her greedy brother who took advantage of their elderly parents. Her version spread through the family like a virus, infecting every conversation, every family WhatsApp group, every casual encounter at the supermarket. I had become the villain of the story in less than 48 hours. During lunch, I received a text message from Rachel. I hope you're happy. Now the whole family knows what kind of person you really are. Mom and Dad are devastated by her betrayal. Betrayal. As if saving the family home from foreclosure was an act of betrayal. As if 3 years of paying for Rachel's constant emergencies was betrayal. I returned home that evening to find 2 unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Through the living room window, I saw Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert sitting with my parents, all wearing the solemn expressions of people discussing a funeral. Philip. Aunt Margaret stood up as soon as I walked in. Finally. We need to resolve this terrible situation. What situation? I asked, taking off my jacket and hanging it carefully on the hook by the door. Don't play dumb, Uncle Robert interjected. Rachel told us everything. How you manipulated his parents into selling the house for a fraction of its real value. Fraction of its real value. I looked at Dad, who was studying the carpet as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Mom repeatedly wiped her glasses, avoiding eye contact. Did you see the independent appraisal? I asked calmly. The amount I paid was determined by a certified broker. That's beside the point, Aunt Margaret said with an impatient gesture. The point is that it was his taking advantage of a difficult situation to make a profit. Profit. As if taking on a $320,000 mortgage on a house that needed structural repairs was profit. As if paying property taxes, insurance, and maintenance was profit. Actually, Dad finally said, her voice low and hesitant, there's something we haven't told you. The silence that followed was heavy. Mom stopped cleaning her glasses and looked at Dad with an expression that was a mixture of fear and relief. Tell us what, Roger? Aunt Margaret asked, frowning. Dad stood up and walked over to the old desk in the corner of the room. He returned carrying a file folder that I recognized immediately, the same one where he kept all the important documents for the house. We weren't just having financial difficulties, he said, opening the folder. We were about to lose the house. He spread the documents across the coffee table: foreclosure notices, letters from the bank, Mom's overdue medical bills, a predatory loan they had taken out against the house. He didn't steal from us, her father continued, her voice gaining strength. He saved us. Aunt Margaret picked up one of the notices, his eyes widening as he read it. Roger, why didn't you tell us? Because, Mom said softly, finally finding her voice, every time we mentioned financial problems, you suggested we ask her for more money. As if she were her retirement fund. The comment hit home. For years, the entire family had assumed that Rachel would inherit the house and take care of her parents. No one had stopped to question whether she had the competence or real interest in caring for anyone other than herself. That's different, Uncle Robert said, but his conviction had wavered. Family is family. You should have found another way. What other way? Dad's voice rose slightly. The bank gave us 60 days to pay off $140,000 in arrears or lose everything. Rachel didn't have that kind of money. Did you? Silence was her answer. Philip offered to buy the house for full market value, Mom added. We paid off all our debts, we're free of payments, and we can still live here for the rest of our lives. It was the best thing that had happened to our family in years. I watched Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert process this information. Rachel's narrative, greedy brother steals innocent parents' house, was crumbling in the face of documented facts. Where was Rachel when you needed her help? I asked calmly. Dad laughed bitterly. Borrowing another $2,000 for an investment opportunity that never materialized. My phone vibrated with another message from Rachel. Are you telling lies about me to the whole family? What kind of person does that? I just wanted a place to stay. I showed the message to Aunt Margaret, who frowned. She said she was desperate, that she had nowhere to go. She has an apartment, I replied. An apartment that our parents have been helping to pay for 2 years. That's true, Mom confirmed. We pay $500 a month for her rent, plus car insurance, and there's always some emergency that costs another $1,000 or $2,000. For the first time since they arrived, Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert looked genuinely uncomfortable. The image of Rachel as an innocent victim was being systematically dismantled by facts they couldn't refute. Maybe, Uncle Robert said slowly, we should hear both sides of the story before jumping to conclusions. But I had already stopped caring who believed what. Because while the family argued over versions and narratives, I had discovered something much more disturbing over the past 2 days. That morning, while cleaning out the attic for some minor renovations, I found boxes that Rachel had left there years ago. One of them contained papers that she had probably forgotten about, apartment rental agreements that he never mentioned, bank statements showing expenses far greater than her official income, and correspondence with a lawyer about inheritance rights and family property. Date of the first document, 3 years ago. Rachel wasn't simply assuming she would inherit the house. She had been planning to claim it legally for years, even though she knew our parents were struggling financially. As Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert said goodbye with promises to talk to Rachel about the real situation, he went up to his old bedroom, now his temporary office. I turned on the computer and opened the digital folder I had been organizing for months. Screenshots of all Rachel's messages asking for money. Copies of all the checks our parents had written to her. Records of all the times she promised to pay back and failed to do so. 3 years of meticulous documentation that revealed not a sister in temporary difficulty, but a systematic pattern of financial manipulation. And now, with the documents from the attic, he had proof of something much worse: premeditation. Rachel wasn't reacting to his purchase of the house. She was executing a plan she had been developing for years to take control of the family assets. The difference was that he had gotten there first. I looked out the bedroom window, watching the city lights come on in the gathering darkness. All my adult life, I had been his responsible son, the one who solved problems without creating drama, who helped without asking for recognition. But Rachel had crossed a line by spreading lies about him to the whole family. By trying to paint him as the villain in a situation where he was clearly the savior. If she wanted a war of narratives, she would have one. But this time, he had something she never had: the truth, properly documented. And as any good engineer knows, the strongest foundation always wins in the end. As I typed the first email to my cousin Robert, attaching the documents from the attic, I wondered how many in the family really knew Rachel beneath the facade of the troubled but well-meaning sister. They were about to find out. The following Thursday, my plan was in motion. The first call was to Jennifer, the family lawyer cousin, who had always had a complicated relationship with Rachel. I didn't mention the attic documents initially, I just asked about legal precedents for sensitive family situations involving property. "Philip," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the professional caution she used when she sensed family drama approaching, "does this have to do with Rachel and the house?" "Partially. But there are more complex issues involved." 2 hours later, she was in my office examining copies of the documents I had found. Her expression changed completely as she read drafts of correspondence between Rachel and a lawyer about strategies for contesting wills and children's rights to family property. "She was consulting on how to nullify an inheritance 3 years ago," Jennifer said slowly, "even before his parents had serious financial problems. That suggests premeditation for a legal challenge." Keep reading. The next page showed a detailed plan Rachel had outlined for establishing residence on the family property as a basis for claiming rights. It wasn't just a move of convenience, it was a documented legal strategy. Jesus, Philip. He was planning to take the house legally for years. While his parents were paying his bills, she was consulting on how to remove them from the property. Exactly. And now she's trying to paint me as the villain because I interfered with her plan. Jennifer rearranged the papers, her legal mind clearly processing the implications. "Do you have more evidence of financial manipulation?" 3 years meticulously documented. I opened my laptop and showed her the spreadsheets I had compiled. Every loan she asked for, every broken promise, every convenient crisis that needed immediate cash. And her, never paid anything back. Not a penny. But always with elaborate excuses about why this time would be different. Jennifer studied the numbers, frowning. "Philip, this isn't just financial irresponsibility. It's a systematic pattern of family financial abuse." Family financial abuse. The term I had never used, but which perfectly described what I had witnessed for years. "What do you recommend?" "Additional documentation," she said immediately. "Every interaction from now on needs to be recorded. If Rachel is spreading defamation about you to the family, you need legal protection." That night, I installed recording apps on my phone and began documenting every family contact. The first opportunity came on Saturday when Rachel showed up at the house unannounced. I was in the backyard helping Dad with small repairs when I heard her shrill voice coming from the kitchen. Through the window, I saw her gesturing animatedly to Mom, clearly in the middle of another drama. "I can't believe you're choosing Philip over me," her voice carried into the backyard. "I'm your daughter too. I should have rights in this house." Rights. As if family relationships were legal contracts with guaranteed benefits. I walked in the front door, discreetly activating the recorder on my phone. "Rachel," I greeted her calmly. "I didn't know you were coming today." She turned to him with red eyes and smudged makeup. "Philip. What a coincidence that you show up just as I'm trying to talk to our parents about the terrible situation you've created." "What situation would that be?" "You know exactly what situation." Her voice rose dangerously. "You stole my inheritance. You manipulated our parents into selling the house to you." "He didn't manipulate anyone. He offered a solution when you were about to lose everything to the bank." "That's the problem." Rachel exploded. "You always show up as the hero saving everyone. You do it on purpose to make him look like a failure." The accusation was so absurd that it took me a moment to process. I had become the villain for solving problems? For being financially responsible? "Rachel," Mom tried to intervene, "Philip did nothing wrong." "Of course not." Rachel shouted. "Philip never does anything wrong. Philip is perfect. Philip has money. Philip has his own house. Philip, Philip, Philip." The outburst revealed years of pent-up resentment. It wasn't just about the house, it was about every comparison she created in her own mind between our lives. "I worked for everything I have," he said calmly. "Oh sure. The perfect son who worked hard while his troubled sister wasted her life." Tears of anger streamed down his face. "You never had depression. You never had anxiety. You never had to figure out who you are. You're 28, Rachel. Most people have figured out who they are by that age. It was the wrong thing to say. Her face contorted in pure fury. That's it. That's exactly it. You always judge him. You always put him down. You always act like you're superior. It's not about superiority. It's about responsibility. Responsibility. She laughed hysterically. You know what responsibility is, Philip? It's taking care of his family. It's making sure his sister doesn't become homeless. You're not homeless. You have an apartment. Which I can barely afford because our parents now spend all their money helping him with his new house. The distortion of reality was striking. Our parents didn't pay for anything related to the house. I covered all the expenses. But in Rachel's mind, any money that wasn't directed toward her represented a personal injustice. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I have something interesting to show you. Rachel froze when she saw that I was recording. Are you recording me? Her voice dropped dangerously low. I am documenting this conversation, yes. Delete that. Now. Why? If you're just telling the truth, what's the problem with having a record? She looked at our parents, then back at me. You can't record people without permission. Actually, I corrected her, in our state, only one party needs to consent to the recording. And he consented. If you've been following stories of family conflicts like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next part will show how far Rachel was willing to go to get what she wanted. What she didn't know was that he had spent the previous week not only gathering evidence, but also talking to people she considered safe allies. Like Uncle Robert, who became very interested when I mentioned the documents in the attic. Like Cousin Jennifer, who now had a completely different perspective on Rachel's problems. And especially like Dorothy, Mom's best friend of 30 years, who had observed Rachel's behavior patterns since she was a teenager. Philip, Dorothy had told me on Tuesday, your sister has always been manipulative. Your mother knows this, but she feels guilty for not being able to fix her. It's time for someone to protect your parents from what she has become. Protect my parents. Not from financial difficulties or health problems, but from the very daughter she raised without limits. You can't use this recording against me, Rachel said, but her voice had lost its previous conviction. I don't intend to use it against you, he replied. I intend to use it in favor of the truth. She looked around the room like a cornered animal, searching for an exit that didn't exist. For the first time in years, Rachel was facing real consequences for her actions. This isn't going to stand, she said finally, her voice thick with venom. You think you can destroy me, but he's going to fight. He's going to prove to the whole family what kind of person he really is. Please do, I said calmly. I really want the whole family to see what kind of person he really is. And what kind of person he is too. She slammed the door hard enough to make the picture frames on the wall rattle. Mom sighed deeply. Philip, her trying to cause trouble. I know. But this time, I'm prepared. What neither of them knew was that Rachel had already begun her family smear campaign, but she had made one crucial mistake. She underestimated how many people in the family were already tired of her manipulations. And now, with documented evidence of her true plans for the house, I had something much more powerful than she had. The truth, verifiable and irrefutable. The following Monday, I sent an email to every member of the family. The subject line was simple: clarification on the house situation, with documentation. I included copies of the documents from the attic, the recordings of the conversations, with names edited to protect privacy, and a complete financial summary of the last 3 years. But the final element of my plan was still in development. Because Rachel had threatened a fight, and I was about to give her exactly that. A fight that she could never win, but one that would finally expose the truth for the whole family to see. The family meeting took place the following Sunday, exactly as I had planned. The whole family was there, my parents, Aunt Margaret, Uncle Robert, Cousin Jennifer, and even Dorothy, whom I had specifically invited as a neutral witness. Rachel arrived 15 minutes late, clearly expecting to find a sympathetic audience for yet another session of victimization. Instead, she found a silent room and a coffee table covered with documents arranged in neat piles. "What is this?" she asked, stopping in the doorway with a look of growing alarm. "It's the truth," he replied calmly, remaining standing while she sat down reluctantly. The complete truth about the last 3 years. I started with the first pile, bank statements showing every transfer our parents had made to Rachel. $27,460 over 3 years. Each loan documented with the date, amount, and excuse that she used. Medical emergency, that turned out to be a trip to Las Vegas. Apartment deposit, that never happened. Investment in professional training, that she dropped out of in the first week. Aunt Margaret studied the numbers, her face growing progressively paler. Rachel, that's a lot of money. They're temporary situations. Rachel protested, but her voice had lost its previous conviction. I always intended to pay it back. Intended. I picked up the second stack. These are his messages from the last 6 months. In no one of them does he mention repayment or a repayment schedule. Just new emergencies and new requests. Each message revealed the pattern of emotional manipulation that she used systematically. The room grew so quiet I could hear the ticking of Dad's old clock. Now, I said, reaching for the third stack, we come to the most interesting findings. Rachel stiffened in her chair when she recognized the papers I had found in the attic. These documents show that Rachel wasn't simply assuming she would inherit the house. She was actively planning to force an early inheritance 3 years ago. Uncle Robert picked up the correspondence with the lawyer, his eyes widening as he read. Rachel, you were consulting on how to contest your parents' will, while they are still alive. It was just research. Rachel shouted, finally losing her composure. I wanted to understand my rights. Your rights. Jennifer, my lawyer cousin, read the next document. It says here that you were exploring strategies for establishing residency as a basis for property claims. Rachel, this is premeditated legal manipulation. The tears started, but this time no one moved to comfort her. You don't understand, she sobbed. I needed security. Philip always had it easy, he was always the favorite. Favorite. Dad stood up, her voice carrying a mixture of pain and indignation I had never heard before. Rachel, we sacrificed our own financial security to support you for years. And while you were doing that, I continued, picking up the fourth stack, she was documenting every bit of help as evidence that you were incapable of managing the property on your own. The silence was absolute when I showed Rachel's handwritten notes about our parents' mental deterioration and her growing financial dependence, evidence she planned to use in an eventual legal challenge. Dorothy, who had remained silent until then, spoke for the first time. Rachel, you were documenting moments of normal tiredness and forgetfulness as evidence of mental incapacity? That's monstrous. I didn't, Rachel began, but stopped when she saw the expressions of horror on the faces around the room. Aunt Margaret stood up abruptly. I can't do this anymore. I can't defend this. Wait. Rachel stood up too, panic clear in her voice. You're only hearing his side of the story. Philip is manipulating all of you. With documents you wrote yourself? Jennifer asked coldly. With her own text messages and emails? That's when I played my final card. There's one more thing, I said, reaching for my phone. Rachel, do you remember our conversation last Saturday? The one you insisted I stop recording. His face turned completely pale. We found out something interesting about recording laws in our state. Only one party needs to consent. And there are some very revealing phrases in that recording. I played the audio file. Rachel's voice echoed through the room. You always show up as the hero saving everyone. You do it on purpose to make me look like a failure. And then, do you know what responsibility is, Philip? It's making sure that her sister doesn't become homeless. And finally, the most devastating part, I just wanted a place to stay. This house should be his by right. The audio perfectly captured her mindset, entitlement without responsibility, expectation without contribution. My God, Mom whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Rachel, is this how he really feels about our family? Rachel looked around the room, finding only faces of disappointment and disapproval. Even Uncle Robert, who had always been his defender, looked away. You don't understand the pressure I feel, she shouted. Being the problem child, always compared to perfect Philip. No one asked you to be a problem, he said, her voice laden with a pain that cut through my heart. We offered help, support, patience. You chose to turn that into manipulation. Jennifer snapped the document folder shut. Rachel, based on what I've seen here, you have committed family fraud and possibly attempted elder manipulation. If Philip wanted, he could press criminal charges against you. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine. Rachel turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Philip, please. I'm her sister. Yes, I replied calmly. You are my sister. And that's why I'm going to offer you something that he never offered me, a second chance. The relief that flashed across her eyes was quickly replaced by caution as I continued. You will pay back every penny you borrowed from our parents. You will get a stable job and keep it. And you will go to real therapy, not the sessions you use as an excuse for manipulation. And if I don't? Then I will hand all of this over to the appropriate authorities. And unlike you, I have irrefutable documentation. Rachel looked around the room once more, searching for a single sympathetic face. She found none. The meeting ended with her leaving quietly, without slamming doors this time. In the silence that followed, I realized she had won more than a family battle. She had exposed a pattern of toxic behavior that had infected our family for years. But the real revelation was yet to come. Because Rachel didn't know that I had installed a recorder in my car 2 weeks earlier. And it had captured a very interesting conversation between her and someone that would completely change our understanding of how deep this plan really went. 6 months later, Rachel was sitting in my office, signing the last payment document. $2,000 a month for the next 10 years. No interest, no penalties, just responsibility. She had managed to keep her job at the marketing company, and for the first time in years, she seemed genuinely more mature. Philip, she said, putting away the pen after signing, about that recording you mentioned, what exactly did you hear? I smiled, remembering the day that changed everything. The recording had captured a conversation between Rachel and someone I would never have suspected, Jennifer, my lawyer cousin. But not the Jennifer we knew in the family. This was a calculating version discussing how to invalidate the purchase of the house due to financial coercion of the elderly, and set a precedent for manipulation. Jennifer was using his legal knowledge to help Rachel create a false legal narrative. They had planned to accuse me of financial exploitation of the elderly, using Mom's mental health condition as fabricated evidence. You two underestimated something important, she said, connecting her phone to the sound system. Modern technology. Jennifer's voice echoed through the room. If we can prove that he pressured his parents when her mother was in a vulnerable mental state, we can void the entire transaction. And then Rachel, Philip has always been overly meticulous. Let's use that against him. Every document he has can be reinterpreted as evidence of manipulation. The silence that followed was absolute. You plan to destroy my professional and personal reputation using lies about our mother's mental health, I continued calmly. Jennifer lost her license to practice law when I brought this to the ethics board. Rachel, you narrowly escaped criminal charges. Rachel looked down at her hands. I was desperate, Philip. But that doesn't justify. No, I interrupted. It doesn't justify it. But it also taught me something important about family. During those 6 months, our family dynamic had changed completely. Mom and Dad stopped enabling Rachel's destructive behavior. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert learned to question one-sided versions of events. And Rachel was learning to take responsibility for her own actions. Is the therapy helping? I asked. More than I ever imagined, she admitted. Dr. Stevens made her realize that he had been using his family as an emotional crutch for years. He always assumed that you owed him something simply because he existed. It was the first time I had ever heard Rachel accept genuine responsibility without drama or manipulation. And now I'm learning that independence hurts, but it's worth it. She stood up, straightening her shoulders. Thank you for not suing him. For giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. I watched my sister walk out, carrying herself in a way I had never seen before. True confidence, not the false arrogance she used to display. That night, I had dinner with my parents at his house, our house. The atmosphere was peaceful in a way we hadn't experienced in years. You did the right thing, Dad said, cutting his steak with precise movements. It was difficult, but necessary. Sometimes, Mom added, loving someone means allowing he or she to face the consequences of her choices. It was a lesson that took our family decades to learn. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected text message from Rachel. He got his first promotion. Assistant account manager. Nothing huge, but it's his. Thank you for not giving up on him, even when he gave up on himself. I looked out my office window, watching the sunset paint the city gold. I had discovered that the most satisfying revenge wasn't destroying those who hurt you, but creating consequences that forced them to grow. Rachel wasn't destroyed by her manipulation. She was transformed by her. Our family didn't fragment under the weight of the truth. It grew stronger through it. If stories of family transformation and poetic justice have touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who have turned betrayal into growth. The last time I visited the house, I found Rachel in the backyard helping Dad with the garden. Her hands were dirty with soil, her face was sunburned, and she was laughing at something he had said. She seemed genuinely happy. Not the artificial happiness of someone who gets what they want by manipulating others, but the deep satisfaction of someone who builds something with their own hands. Sometimes the greatest revenge is to allow people to become the best version of themselves, even when they fight against it with all their might.